start it, does it?
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this very hot evening. Hope you've all got a nice big glass of water or something with you. Um, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we hope that you really enjoy our webinars. Amy Dopson has over 20 years of clinical experience working in paediatric nursing, and also works as a child health lecturer to new nurses. And for those of us who have been here lots of times before, you'll know the format, which is, and tonight I think is a slightly smaller set of slides. So Amy's going to speak for about 20 minutes on childhood injury and potential abuse and leave lots of time for questions, because what we notice is that quite often there are so many questions and we want to make sure that we can answer them all and we don't want to run out of time. So I think I'm not going to delay. Lots of people have joined for this evening, and I hope that you find it useful, and we will be sending slides out afterwards so that you can share them with your team, and the webinar will be recorded again so that you can share with anyone who can't make it this evening. So without anything further, Amy, I'm going to hand over to you. And
thank you. Apologies for looking to the side. I was just having a little look at the numbers going up just to see if we were settling. And I think we're probably we are a few minutes in. Our time's always tight, and I know your time's precious when we do it in the evenings. And as Tina said, on this very hot evening, you probably do not want to be sitting in front of a computer any longer than you need to. So the number seems to have settled down. So I think we'll get on with it. So as Tina said, hopefully some of you have joined us before. Very nice to see you all. And I will take this moment to say a little thank you to those of you that have since come on board and said that you've been enjoying our webinars and therefore would quite like to do some of your further courses and study through us. That is a very big compliment. So thank you very, very much. So this one is a little bit different than what we've been doing before. So those of you that have joined us before, we've tended to look at minor injury and minor ailments. This one is very much aimed at those of you working in early years. And this came on the back of something someone asked for, really. We put out a call to see what sort of things you wanted a little bit more information on. And one of the things that came up was around injuries in childhood. So a lot of the things that, childhood injuries and when you should have more of a concern. So one of the things that we've generally talked quite a lot about is how injuries and illness presents itself and how you're going to manage that. And so tonight we're going to just look at, and I think probably the best way for me to word it is some of the things that should raise questions. Probably one of the most challenging things. In fact, I think Tina wanted to mention that one of the roles I'd undertaken over my career, I've done a lot of things. Mainly my background is in emergency care, but have done a role in safeguarding. And I think probably one of the biggest challenges for me, it was a long time ago, where I was permanently doing safeguarding rather than as an A&E nurse. One of the biggest challenges is that when we are dealing with abusive situations, they are inherently dishonest by their nature and inherently going to have hidden secrets within them. So if we all had a crystal ball, it would be a very, very easy thing for us to do. But childhood abuse and injury that comes about following abuse is always going to have elements of untruth, dishonesty within there. So sometimes it's about putting pieces together. So I'm not going to be able to give you a really clear, you must do this, you must do that, because it's just not that simple. But what I'm going to hopefully do is just highlight a couple of those things that will either lead you to definitely raise a concern and follow your procedures for safeguarding. So I should say the other thing we're really focusing on today is how some of the injuries that should lead you to ask questions might present, rather than specifically about the processes, because your processes are very robust. Your processes are very clear and very simple. If you are concerned, you have a safeguarding lead that you would go to, and you have a clear route of escalation. I think the challenge isn't so much that. The challenge is actually, do I need to escalate this? Am I listening to my inner voice? Am I listening to my inner questions? So that's really what we're going to try and focus on tonight. So one of the first things, and you will have heard this bit will be nothing new. I'm hoping that maybe through here, as always, I always hope that there's a little gem or a way of wording something that you haven't heard it said in that way before, and that there's something where I spark a bit of interest for you or help to maybe clarify something that someone's explained to you, especially when we think about injury and illness in the past. So whereas this one, you will all, I know, have done lots of safeguarding before in your past. So let's have a little think about what some of those general basic safeguarding principles are. So how do we really stay awake and alert, and what are we doing? And I have noticed, so I'm going to apologize right from the start, just change one of them. The term professional curiosity is going to come up probably more than once in this presentation, and I won't apologize for that, but I will apologize for the repetitive nature. So what I mean about that is actually for us to protect children, whatever role we work within. So whether we're in early years, whether you're in health, whether you're in social care, whether you're a school teacher, whether you are a police officer, whatever you are doing, whether you are just not just, no one's ever just, whether you're a friend, whether this is about a member of your extended family, what we need to be specifically professionally is we need to be curious. So what that means is we need to allow ourselves and give ourselves permission to ask questions. Either ask questions verbally and not be apologetic about it. So there's ways we can do that that are respectful and that are kind, but actually to create a culture where it is normal for us to ask questions, but then also for all of you to be asking those professional questions either within your head or with your colleagues. So that's one of the things we're going to be trying to get us to do. One of the next things, so that sort of professional curiosity and the asking questions are linked together. So ask questions of yourself, ask questions of your mind, but then ask questions of the child and the family. See beyond behaviour, and what we mean by that is just think about everything as widely as you possibly can. Trust your professional judgment. So not necessarily to say that you're definitely right, but if something is bothering, if something is concerning you, you've got that concern and you've got that niggle, then actually you are going to do something with that information. Whether that is the first stage of your safeguarding process, which is to escalate to someone senior, escalate to your lead for safeguarding, or whether that is to make a referral to social services, that all of those things will depend on the scenario. What we want to really think about with safeguarding basics is sharing our concerns promptly. So not hanging on to information for too long, making sure that if something's bothering you, and at the focus of all of this, because this is a very difficult subject. This is a subject where all of us feel quite uncomfortable. So right at the middle, we have to keep reminding ourselves of the reason that we are doing it, of the reason that we are giving ourselves permission to ask questions, is that at the center of everything, we have a child who maybe, and definitely for many of you, especially with the very young, is not able to speak up for themselves. So what we're really thinking about is those key issues of notice, look, be alert. And that's one of the things I'm really hopefully going to get you to think at, maybe listen, but definitely notice, definitely look, make sure you take accurate records of things and think about how you can report in order to protect. So what I want us to think about, so a few of you may well have joined our, I can't remember exactly what we called it, bumps and breaks or something like that. So we've had bumps and breaks session, we've had a head injury session, we've talked about how children injure themselves. So there are typical patterns of childhood injury. Children are active. So we're really thinking here about not so much the injuries happen with you, although within all of our practice, we also need to think about whether there is anything that's concerning us around, which concerns us around the behaviour of others, the behaviour of our colleagues, but predominantly, I think you're going to be asking these questions when children come in to see you, come back into your care, and over the time that they've been away from you, they've sustained an injury, and particularly if it's an injury that hasn't sought medical attention, or you might be aware that actually you're seeing a child in your care who's had multiple injuries, and of those multiple injuries, when you ask questions about how was the family, did the family seek help, has advice been sought, you then suddenly think, oh, hang on a second, they're always going to different places, or is there anyone in this picture? So we'll have a little think about that. But the first thing for us to remember is healthy children are active. Healthy children are active and will have injuries. So to have injuries on children is normal. That's good part of healthy development. If any of you, I've been to a couple of you that have nurseries within the most incredible community environments. I'm based out in Surrey, so I tend to get some of the ones that are down this way and out of the city, and some of you with these amazing forest nurseries that actively encourage children to play, to jump, but you are always really active and engaged when we do the injury sessions, because actually your children do get injured, but they get injured because you're encouraging them to learn and grow in a really positive way. So normal injuries will occur, but they do tend to occur on particular parts of the body. And we're going to have a look at this on a slide in a second. So bony areas in particular, when those of you that have got your own children or children that you're seeing regularly that are 3, 4, 5, how regularly do you see a child right up into early school years that doesn't have the odd mark or bruise on a shin? Well, that probably means that they're just not a very active child. So shins, knees, elbows, palms of the hands, forehead, really, really common. I mean, I must glue a forehead back together every single shift I ever work, if not multiple times. So those sort of things are normal for a child. So we need to think about some of those patterns. And one of the things I'm going to get you to look at shortly also is about mechanism. So we want to think about child's age and development. This is where your expertise is better than probably a lot of people assessing them within a healthcare environment. If they're being reviewed by a nurse practitioner who's maybe got an adult background, they may not be as good on that child development element as you are. So think about stages of development. You are seeing children, and when you say, oh, what happened to the child, actually think, does that seem feasible for you? You will know how active, how much of a climber this child is. You'll know how brave they are. You'll know whether actually this is the sort of activity. So there might be something that someone tells you about how a child injured themselves. So we're Tuesday morning, a child comes in and they had an injury over the weekend. They've got some bruises on them, and you just generally and casually, and we'll talk about that in a second, ask, what happened? What happened to get the injury? And the explanation you're given doesn't match what you know that this child can do. So the first thing is to accept that children have bumps or bruises, but we're going to start asking questions about it. So walking children fall, and we'll come back to non-mobile babies. This is probably, again, one of the easier ones for you because the guidance is very, very clear. But actually bruising on a non-ambulant, non-mobile baby is a concern and always needs to be referred. Even if there's a very clear explanation, we also need to remember that actually bruising on a non-mobile baby is of concern, but it also might be concern from a medical perspective. So one of the other things for us always to remember that when you're raising concerns about why a child is getting significant number of bruises that doesn't meet the pattern or the history that it's not making any logical sense to you, also remember that underlying all of that may well be that you're the first person that asked the question to the parent, and actually suggests that a child needs to be reviewed. And actually the underlying cause, it's rare, but the underlying cause is a medical abnormality. So also remember that, if something's not making sense to you, it doesn't necessarily mean it's abusive, but it does also mean it needs to be questioned. So we will look at babies in a second, and I've got a nice thing for you to remember. But I particularly also want you to look at the whole picture and not just that single bruise or that single injury. So what's the explanation you've got given? Where is the bruising? Is it in somewhere that causes you a problem? Where is the injury? It's not necessarily a bruise. What's the explanation that the child gives you? So have you got a child that can speak and to talk? Again, you have a lovely privilege that a lot of people don't have, is that the children, once they are verbal and can give you an explanation, probably are normally quite open and chatty with you. So we'll think about some of those non-verbal communication signs, non-physical signs, but one of the communication signs that you might see could well be that a child who usually likes to tell you the ins and outs of their life, and would give you one of my joys of looking after children as a clinician is that I get a very detailed history of who they were playing with, what time of day it was, what colour the box that they stood on to reach the teddy that was this, what game they were playing, stories are creative, and you have that lovely relationship with a child. So again, Is that story matching up? Is that story the same as the parents? Or have you got a child who doesn't want to tell you the story, and that maybe makes you feel like this just doesn't feel quite right? This doesn't feel right for this child, or it feels very much that it's a rehearsed, informed story. Something about how they're talking to you doesn't make you feel comfortable. And then the one really big message that always goes across safeguarding practice, and I'm sure you've heard before, is either severity or persistency. So we're concerned about big accidents or big injuries that may well have happened to a child. Now, that's probably not the sort of thing that you are going to be helping to identify. That's going to be the type of scenario that presents with quite a significantly injured child. So that is in a hospital environment. So those are not the area we're thinking about. But actually, instead, there's also that pattern of where does repeated injuries or accidents start to raise questions about either lack of safety. So we're thinking about things more along a neglect sign, is that child being kept safe, or actually, I keep seeing injuries on this child. Should I be starting to ask questions? Yes, they do fall, but they don't actually really fall with us. They don't have injuries when they're with us. What is it about the number of and the pattern? As I said before, this is difficult. It's not an easy area. So we're just going to touch back on that. And if you haven't seen this slide before, it's a really useful one to have. I know quite a few of you print off a couple of the PowerPoint slides when we do them, when Tina sends them through, and just have them as like little department reminders. This is a really, really useful one about thinking about where are the areas that there are marks, injuries or bruising that should come out to you as, well, that makes complete sense. That's very logical. Actually, I should be asking a question. And one of the things that you'll notice there is it's really about bony surfaces, obvious places where we naturally protect ourselves when we fall, or the first point of contact where we fall, compared to those softer areas that bruise rarely, but also aren't usually the natural process of trying to stop ourselves from injuring ourselves. So that inherent injury protection. So if we just look quickly there, we've got chins. I mean, you'll all have seen children that have cut their chins, hit the chins, bruised the chins, fallen forward and caught themselves under the chin. The same with the forehead. Less, and in fact, exactly as it says, very rarely is it right in the middle. It tends to be one side or the other as the child's trying to move themselves away to stop themselves. We've got the palms of the hands, we've got the elbows, we've absolutely got the back of the head. And in that back, I probably personally, if I was drawing this, I would do a far bigger splodge over the back of the head and sort of towards the sides. You know, that area around that sort of band around the back of the head, again, very common. Knees and shins. However, the very top of the head is far more unusual. Firstly, and we'll come on to mechanism, how would you get to the top of your head? But actually one of those other areas is going to come into contact first. Bruising around the ears, the eyes or the mouth. I think probably for most of you, that one would be one that stood out to you as a bit of a red flag. That bothers me. Injuries to the backs of our hands. Now, there are times when this can happen. Actually, I saw a lovely little boy recently with some nasty burn onto the back of his hand. Very consistent history from him and his parent. I was very happy it was accidental, but it was because he got his hand trapped in something. He actually got his hand trapped in a running machine. So actually, as where he got his hand trapped, the contact was on the top. Whereas other burns would really bother me. Children reach out, they touch things. I see children with burns to the palms of their hands, again, far too often. But a child doesn't really reach out with the back of the hand. So a burn to the back of the hand, I would want a really good explanation for why that occurred. So the tops of the thighs, the backs of the thighs, the back, definitely the buttocks, soft areas that don't particularly bruise. Probably my only exception on that back, but it's an unusual place to fall and hit, would be the bony. So a really skinny child, you do sometimes, if they've fallen directly backwards, see little bruises along maybe the spinal processes or the shoulder blades. So that bony area. But again, it would raise a question, whereas a big bruise on any of the soft areas of the back should be a question, and the same as the soles of the feet. So areas that we should be thinking, oh, this is a bit strange. So a really other useful tool for you just to have is the 10-4 faces. So 10-4 faces, and then they've added the P on as a more recent extra. So the 10, TEN, the torso. So anything around the trunk of the body, so that's the front and the back, is unusual. The ears, and particularly the backs of the ears, the neck. So injuries around the neck. I'm not sure and actually Tina's gorgeous and it makes me a lot younger than I actually am. I think I'm heading into my 33rd year in the NHS. So I don't think I have seen an accidental injury to the neck. I'm sure there are them, but I'm not sure I've ever seen an accidental injury to the neck. If I've chin, yeah, collarbones, yes, shoulders all the time, head often, but injuries to the neck, very, very rare. There will be a reason, but not so much. Faces, faces, we go through areas within the face. So the frenulum, that's that, I can't talk and point to it. That's that little bit of skin under the top lip between the two front teeth. I will absolutely say that I've seen injuries to the frenulum that are genuine injuries quite often, especially when a child falls and hits their face forward. But it's also a well identified area for, particularly in the very young, injuries, for example. And again, I didn't want to particularly get into today thinking about the mechanism too much of what happens to children, but thinking maybe about things like where a child's forced to drink from a bottle, or other injuries that are rough care around the face and the mouth. So I think for you there, one of the things would be to flag that as a concern, and then that's for a medically qualified person to assess and see whether that feels like that meets a. So an injury to the frenulum that's also got bruising around the mouth from a child that fell would bother me far less than an injury to the frenulum, so inside the mouth, without an external injury. The angle of the jaw, so again, we mean around this part, so the area is just very unusual to be injured. The fleshy part of the cheeks, eyelids definitely. When child falls, we've already talked about it, the forehead takes the brunt, the eyelids most definitely don't. And we would be concerned about any child who has injuries to the conjunctiva of the eye, so that's the white part of the eye. So we then have the 4 rules. So we've had the 10, that's the torso, ears and neck. We have the faces, so looking at those 5 areas. And then we have the 4. So 4 relates to 4 months and under. So infants of 4 months and under with bruising generally anywhere should be flagged as a concern. And again, back to that point that I would really raise, that maybe when you're sharing this with a parent, actually part of the thing that you would think of if you had to share, and you needed to then also speak to a parent about why you were sharing a bruising in an infant of that young age, actually just remember that infants of this age don't bruise. So therefore we need to find out whether there could be any medical reason why your child is bruising when they shouldn't be bruising. And then the last thing for us to think about, and again, this one's always a little bit of a horrible one because it's got that sort of picture to make you think about what might have happened. We're thinking about patterns. So patterns of bruising, patterns of injury. So whether that would be a child that sustained a burn. And again, if they've sought medical attention, this is also for the medics to have identified and to recognise. But one of the things that I'm really thinking for you is that you may well see children, particularly with bruising, who haven't sought medical attention. So with wounds and cuts, I would hope that they had sought some advice. With burns, if they haven't sought advice, you very, very definitely can say you should be seeking medical advice for that burn. So really for patterns for you, it's probably thinking more about bruising patterns. Is there anything that looks like it follows a shape or a mark? Is there something that's looking unusual to you about how that presentation is? Is there a cluster of bruises and they're not joined together? And there's not a really clear explanation. You might have a lovely clear explanation of a pattern where a parent says the child literally fell on a particular toy. It's the sort of toy that you are familiar with, and you can totally see how the child absolutely did fall against that particular thing, and that makes complete sense about the mark. One of the things you might want to do though, and we'll talk about it a little bit more at the end, But actually, if a parent gives you an explanation that you all see as very feasible, doesn't still mean that you shouldn't document that that's what you heard and that's what you were told, so that if later a concern is raised, we can go back to that. Okay, so my next really, really big tip, and I love that me and Tina said we would talk for less, and I'm still going as slow as ever, is mechanism of injury. Mechanism of injury is a really useful thing for you to think in your own head. So whenever I see any child who comes in, the main job that I should be doing is firstly asking them for the explanation. So again, that's probably a thing that I think would be easier for you. You're more likely to notice in a 3, 4, 5-year-old child, so a child that can definitely speak to you and share the story, you're more likely to be asking them directly anyway, because you're with them. So my job is to make sure that I actually hear the story from the child, but then in my head I walk myself through it. Excuse me, grabbing some water. I think, what are they telling me that happened? I'm going to now imagine myself, or I'm going to imagine this child in that injury, in that activity, and with whatever they've told me has happened, is it feasible that, so if I talked again, like I said to you before, the child with their hand getting caught into the running machine belt, I'm then thinking about, so what were they doing? Where was the parent? Where was the child? This was a child that was old enough to talk to me as well. And I can see that he wanted to reach in, because as it flips round, this particular running machine has a flash of colour as it's coming round. And without telling anyone what to do, he went to try and catch the colour. Now, I can see that his fingers would have gone in under the belt. The parents actually did bring me a picture of what it was to help, which some parents do. And I could see that there was a bar, and then this, like, you know what I mean, the running belt, sort of friction belt running over the top that would have gone across the tops of his fingers. Absolutely very good rationale why there was nothing on the hand, because that wasn't touching anything hot or anything moving. So it was a really clear mechanism for me. In the same sort of way as a child, and again, I don't want to do too many unpleasant ones, but probably one of the better explanations for this one, and I'm not going into a lot of detail, would have been a child with a facial injury. And the history that I was given for that was that so the child was 5, and she was coming up the stairs as something was thrown down the stairs. Now, my rationale always for this, and this did turn out not to be an accidental injury, so this child had got quite a nasty injury anyway, so that alone had raised a concern. But also my rationale was that I'm one of these bad people who does chuck things down the stairs. But I would generally look first. So first off, I was thinking, how strange you would throw something down the stairs without looking to see if a child was coming up the stairs in a house that has children. But the second thing that really struck me with that scenario was that unless you are, and this is not meant flippantly, so I hope it lands in the correct way, unless you're in a Home Alone film, where if you watch the Home Alone series, they look at cans of paint flying to their face. We wouldn't do that. No child or adult instinctively would look at something heading towards them. So if she had appeared with an injury on the side of her forehead, even in this case on the top of the head, I might have actually understood that, because that would have been the movement that she was undertaking. But because she had this injury quite literally on the front of her face, actually for me that didn't meet the mechanism of injury. There was a real concern there, because I couldn't understand why anyone would look towards an object flying towards their face. We would always instinctively move ourselves away in some way. So one of the things I want you to do, if you are discussing injuries with children and families, or one of the things that might be useful for you, is literally do it with someone else. Go on a break, go and talk to a colleague, go and stand in and just walk yourself through it. Can you make it logically explain? Right, I will move a bit quicker, but actually the next couple of things are more repetitive to what you've normally done. So I've said this thing about being professionally curious. So is what I'm being told plausible? So that goes back to that mechanism. Does this make sense? Is it, and this is your area of expertise, is it consistent with the child's developmental stage and abilities? Do I think that that child could have done? And maybe if you don't, you're just going to watch the child a little bit over the next few days to see if they're showing any signs that actually they have moved on in a stage, and they just happen to have performed that for the first time with their parent. But you're going to clock it, because some of these things, there might not be enough to refer straight away or enough to discuss, but you might have something, and definitely to raise a concern. Are there injuries that can't be explained? So actually you're asking people about things that happened. You happen to have been changing a child and you noticed that they had a bruise sort of around the lower back. So an area that I've said is unusual. So they've got a bruise over the lower back, and it's quite noticeable. And so when their parent picks them up later, you ask about the bruise, and actually they just say, oh, I don't know how it happened. And you ask the child if they're old enough to answer you, and you can't get an explanation. Has the explanation changed? So the parents told you what happened, but later on the child tells you what's happened, and there's an inconsistency in that. So actually that's sort of pretty much the same. So either is there an inconsistency in the history you're being given, or is there an inconsistency in what you are seeing and what you are being told? So, but the really, really, really important ones are those first ones. Is it plausible? So ask yourself lots of questions inside your own head. So a couple of the signs, so we've touched on quite a few. So just a quick summary of the signs of physical signs that might help you to identify a child where possibly there is an area of concern that at least needs further exploration. Bruises, particularly bruises in strange places or bruises where our child isn't mobile. Injuries, we've said, with that clear shape or pattern. I think that's probably more unlikely that you're going to see this, but you might do. Multiple injuries without good explanations at different stages of healing. So my one exception to that would be the shins. I think I could probably age 2 or 3 different injuries on most children's shins and lower legs when I see them. So knees and shins often have lots of different, you watch them, these children, you would know whether they fall over all the time. Probably some of those bruises were sustained while they were in your care, so accidentally. So that's one of those things for you to look at. But actually, if you're thinking differently, well, actually we've got a bruise there and we've got other bruises here, and I'm not really sure about the location. Burns and scalds, actually for you guys, I'm going to say burns and scalds without a very clear explanation and without a good history that they have been reviewed medically. So we do think about things with a clear edge. So we worry about burns and scalds that aren't particularly someone who gives a history of scald, where the edge lines of what we would expect to see with a scald is a central area and then a very nondescript pattern or shape. So something with a pattern or shape or a mark is a little bit more concerning, usually, as a general rule. That might be a little bit too general though. But burns and scalds, I would always recommend get reviewed. Frequent or unexplained injuries. So this is a child that's always injured, doesn't really get injured very much when they're with you, but they often present to you injured, should be raising a red flag for you, and those unexplained injuries, or injuries associated with children where you were already concerns about signs of neglect. And I think there's also that question often about at what point does too many, they're all genuine accidents, but at what point is too many accidents starting to be a concern? So again, if I gave you a very quick example of this, a child who we saw who the first injury was just a fall off the top of the slide, but they were only about 3. He was a very active child, so again, we were that was a plausible injury. But then he fell out of a parked, but the car window, so the window was wound down. The parent was at the doorstep talking to someone else. He was in the car alone, so it was parked and it was sort of on a safe, quiet road, but he was able to take his own seatbelt off, lean out of the window and fall out of the car and then bump his head, not significantly. And then within the next couple of weeks, this same child had taken his aunt's or his grandmother's medication because the handbag was left lying around. And there is a point where all of those 3, we absolutely believed all were an accident. But at what point do you start saying, well, actually too many accidents is a concern? Behavioural indicators. So one of the things for you to think about here is actually how the child is And again, you have this lovely thing that I don't have, which is knowledge of the child. So sudden changes in behaviour or personality. So a child that's not normally acts in certain ways, so either is normally quiet and now suddenly becomes very outgoing, or vice versa. A child who appears fearful, anxious, or withdrawn. These are the sort of things, again, that probably this is the area you're a little bit more comfortable in, and I'm imagining this is the area that you've had a lot of training in before. But there are some really good signs in how children behave around different people. Again, you might see always one person dropping the child off or picking them up, or you might start to pick up a pattern in that the behavior is very, very different when a certain person drops them off or a certain person picks them up, and that's something that might make you a little concerned. Again, it's always hard to talk about that sort of concept of within your own environment as well, but that's one of the things you should also be considering about how children behave around new members of staff, different members of staff. Is there anything about the way a child particularly acts around a member of staff that is also raising a particular concern? Regression is often a good indicator that something is wrong and that the child is stressed. Doesn't necessarily obviously mean that it's an indicator of abuse, but it's one of those things that might trigger to you as something of concern. So you might be aware that in this family there is a lot of stress. Maybe there's a separation, there's something that you know is going on, so you've got an explanation for it. But if you don't have an explanation for why the child might be suddenly why the child might be regressing and what stress they're under, then you might want to consider that. And here I'm just thinking about a child again who's developed speech and then regresses in their speech, a child who's developed skills around toileting and regresses those. Again, you will also know that there are normal patterns in childhood development that have odd blips of regression, but this is about something that's standing out to you as being a little bit more different. So again, use your own skills, use your knowledge set that tells you when something's a little bit different from the norm. Children who are reluctant, so that's a little bit the same about being clingy or distressed to certain people or from certain people, but again, a child who suddenly isn't comfortable about leaving, seems fearful, or seems to change their behavior or their personality. I think you see this a little bit more in older, so it'd be those of you that are doing the preschool age child or into school age children, because we have to have developed our ability to manipulate our own behavior positively to certain other people's behavior, which tends to only come in those older children. But you might notice that suddenly a child around certain people really changes the way that they act, but it might also be in a way of pacifying, in a way of keeping a scenario calm, keeping a person happy, being over enthusiastic to please. So that sort of changes in sleep, eating and play patterns fit a little bit with the regression, what's happening, what's different, and changes in abilities to socialize or self-exclusion. So are you noticing something that's different about how the child behaves? So red flags, I think this is, well, to be fair, I wouldn't know on what the statistics are for you guys on disclosures. So by a disclosure, what we mean is a child who's telling you something. So a red flag, you must take action, is we must assume that any child who shares something with you is truthfully selling you something, and therefore it needs to be at least explored and escalated. So we definitely need to do that. Injuries that are poorly explained should be a red flag. Again, think about when you last chatted to a child about how they hurt themselves outside of your care. I am certain that they would have given you a very descriptive story about what happened. So a child who doesn't really have a story, it might be that they just didn't know, but definitely a child who's being evasive around their story is not a usual behaviour. So it's an unusual behaviour that should trigger a red flag to you. Bruising, I've mentioned lots already, but we'll just still add it in that red flag. Bruising in a child who is not mobile is a red flag and needs an intervention. Injuries that are not matching that developmental stage. So again, we're repeating the things, but this is just to jump out to you at the things that should be red flags. patterns of concern, so pattern of injury or pattern of the injury, changes in mood or behaviour, or particularly a child that's looking quite fearful of that behaviour. And so the last bit, and then we'll go on to our normal questions section, is what we really want you to do. I've said it a lot, but it is okay to ask questions. It's okay to say to a family, oh, I noticed they had a bruise on his back. What happened? Did you even know that he had that bruise? How did it come about? And then it's also okay for you to ask the child questions. It's also okay for you to ask someone else later on a question. It is appropriate. We remember who we're keeping at the middle of the center of that scenario. That's why we're doing it. But it's also really, really important that we are kind and that we are respectful in how we do that, and that we listen. Because also in listening, we may get that additional bit of information. Share your concerns with colleagues. So if something's niggling you and you just need to talk it out with them, definitely do. But also listen to the concerns of others. Try not to be dismissive. Try and see what it is that is bothering someone. Even if you see it differently, it may well be that together you can explore that and you can use that professional curiosity. You can think about that mechanism. You may well come to a conclusion that actually you are both really, really comfortable and happy, but it's really important that you do listen, especially when the concerns are coming from someone junior to yourself, actually who needs to be able to voice what it is that's scaring them. You have got safeguarding leads, so use them. Supervision is one of the best ways of us keeping people safe, and then ensure that you are following the processes that you already have. So you have robust safeguarding processes within early years. I know this is one of the things that we may look at a little bit more in another session, but you have some really, really robust processes, so actually they are there to help and protect you. So this was quite an open and a difficult in lots of ways, difficult in a hard to give you the absolute perfect answers of how you can identify abuse from injuries, but it was really just to make sure it gave you some ideas of some of the things that you might want to explore a little bit more to help you be professionally curious, as I've said hundreds of times now. Stop saying that word. Right, for those that are interested, the resources are on the end there. Okay, so good question, and I was expecting the questions, so I really try hard to answer all of your questions with an actual answer and not be ambiguous. But I am imagining for this session, quite a lot of it will be an ambiguous answer, and it's not intentionally meant that way. It's just there are always so many what ifs. So the question is, would you refer a child in with a bruise in an uncommon area from a mobile child straight away? And my answer to that is I definitely would discuss a bruise in a unusual area, but actually this is about putting all of those things together a little bit, but also don't take that responsibility alone. So with someone else, think about what is the explanation you were given. So I mentioned the frenulum. Well, I definitely would have had scenarios where someone's given me a very plausible, the child was running, they tripped, caught themselves on the corner of, it took you a minute to wake up and now lots of questions coming, lovely. Caught on the corner of a table, for example, and I've also got an injury to the outside of the lip. I would definitely have seen, so buttock, we said, in fact, I saw one, it was in an adult, but I saw a cracking bruise to the buttock yesterday in practice, but because this was someone who had jumped off something, slipped, and as they had landed on a hard object. So if someone told you that they fell off a slide, but actually as they landed on the toy tractor, and they landed sitting on the buttock, we may well have a bruise to the buttock, and we may well have an obvious injury. So what I would say is none of these one things help you in isolation. If your gut feeling is, I don't feel comfortable with this, but it may well be that you see a child with a single bruise in an uncommon area, you're given a very clear explanation, you record it, because most of you would record that, and then that's something that you watch and monitor. A single bruise, no, I wouldn't, unless there was anything else around that child or that explanation that worried me. So like I said, a little bit of a fluffy answer, I'm sorry. What if someone is not competent to follow through? Really good question, and this is probably the main reason why we fail by we, I mean healthcare clinicians too, is our responsibility. So this, where what I would say is my best answer with that. So the question, I don't know if everyone can see it, is what if someone's not confident to follow through as they have a good relationship with the parents? And this is probably one of your biggest challenges. And this is where you have to, as a professional, remember that at the center of that scenario is a child. If you are worried about them, you have to protect them. But if you are worried about them, then you would also question the behavior of the parent. And that's where you go to others. That's where you go to the senior. So if you are a childminder on your own, this is where it is difficult. But there are people who can support and help and advise you on that. So if you have a safeguarding lead, you have one. But also you can discuss with amongst colleagues, friends, you can discuss appropriately, I mean, and you can also get advice from social services. Actually, what's more likely to happen is when we have a good relationship with a parent, we choose to not see information that's in front of our eyes. That's probably what happens more. Whereas if you're really confident that there is something of concern, then actually that's going to make you question your relationship with the parent anyway. It's more likely that you are going to allow your eyes to be closed to something that is there. Thank you, Maxine. That was just a comment on the body maps. Do you use
Amy,
them?
I'm just going to interrupt there just to say something about that question.
Oh, yes, go on,
Which is
please
that
do.
I think that we will do a follow-up webinar, because I think that this is one of the really big problems with safeguarding is how to have the conversations, how to escalate. What if it's a colleague that you're concerned about? So I think we will have a separate webinar about that, and we'll probably do some sort of role plays about how you have conversations. So look, we'll let you know when that one comes up, but I think it's something that we probably need to do.
Yeah. That's a really good question. So the next question is, in mild head injuries, does the parent need to inform always? Well, actually, a parent doesn't need to inform you about anything. But what I'm giving you the permission to do for yourself is to say, actually, I have a responsibility as well. Everyone does, even members of the public, but they don't have a professional responsibility to protect children. But your job is to protect children. So what the parent should be quite comfortable and happy to do is to answer your questions as long as you do them, as I said before, with respect and with kindness. So, I noticed, or whoever the child mentioned that they bumped their head over the weekend, or I noticed a bruise, I noticed a mark. And just chat about it freely with the parent. But yeah, that is a really good question. No one needs to tell you unless you have set that as an agreement with the parent. So actually, some of you, and again, if you've got a private negotiated, those of you that are childminders can often negotiate that a little bit more of, I'd really like to always know if the child's had an injury over the weekend so that I can be aware of it. But actually, it's a really good point that they don't have to tell you. Nice comment there. So I'll skip past that one. Okay. So a little bit more information on the one before. So I'm just going to swing back to that. So we've got a good relationship with the parent. But yeah, if you have so I'm going to, hopefully I've interpreted this right. So they believed everything the parent said. It was very feasible, but the baby is non-verbal. If the baby is non-mobile and non-verbal, then you must definitely report a bruise. If you have a great, not in fact, take the relationship with the parent out. If you have a child who can't take, because that's a lot of the time, I see a lot of children who can't give me an explanation for their injury. I'm basing my evidence on the parent's explanation of the injury, but I'm considering it against all of those things before. So is it in a common place? Is this a mobile child? So is this a 1-year-old who may well not be able to tell you this, so that 14 months learning to walk, mobile, but toddling and falling, isn't yet talking, has sustained an injury. You're going to ask those curiosity questions. You're going to think about where that injury is. You're going to think, is this plausible? So I think the scenario you gave me was that you did think it was a completely plausible, you believed the parent, then no, you wouldn't necessarily have to refer that. Again, you'd make note of it. Again, you'd be looking for patterns. But if the child was bruised and was non-verbal and non-mobile, regardless of how much you respected and believed that parent, that should cause a concern. If a child not talkative can't explain the injury and the parent can't explain, most definitely safeguarding, but is there anything else to do? So actually, so that was a good one on if child can't explain, the parent can't explain, then actually you would escalate and be concerned. Anything else to do really just depends on whether you are happy that this is a referral solely through your safeguarding processes, which would go towards social services, or actually is this an injury that you are now worried hasn't been managed? Because that's sort of the bit that we didn't touch on. Is that one of the things that might be what you're wanting to do is say to the parent, actually, you are worried about the injury the child has sustained, and actually you think that they should have gone to, again, you can't make a parent take their child to seek medical help. We've talked about this quite a lot on the unwell child scenarios. All you can do is advise a parent, but if a parent's choosing not to take your advice, choosing not to seek support, it might be another thing that raises your concerns, another thing that makes you think, actually, we need to refer this child. Oh, okay. That one sounds a bit too complicated. I'm going to read it out. I'm going to try and answer it. Would you refer a child who has a burn mark? So my first thing is I would say that unless a burn in a child is very, very, very superficial. So by that, I'm talking red, no blistering, no obvious marking. And the age group you are dealing with, so the preschool age group, most children's burns should be reviewed. Children's skin is incredibly delicate. It shouldn't be being self-managed. Burns should generally be seen. And what I'd also say is, in my view and experience, it is unusual for parents not to want their child's burn to be managed appropriate. So first off, I'd be bothered about a parent who a child had a burn. The bit of yours that's making me, so child explained what happened, mum has explained also. The two explanations are similar, but the child said the parent did it and the mum said the child did it. Again, I think that there is quite a few bits in that scenario that you should at least be discussing with another colleague, probably without the full detail and without understanding that one. It's hard for me to, there is some red flags there, but I'm also not going to always say with any of them, yes, you definitely need to. Becky, I think I've now dealt with your one, which was to read out the questions because I've realised halfway through that you couldn't see them. Are lone childminders allowed to discuss with another trusted childminder any concerns, as we do not have a team? So I think that's a really interesting question. And I would, again, Tina might jump in because she is better at your rules and regulations, but I'm going to base this on a nursing rule and regulation, which I'm going to guess is probably even stricter. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with you discussing without detail. So you can absolutely talk about a scenario. Now, what's tricky is if you are a lone childminder of a lone child, that's quite hard to make that confidential. However, I would totally agree that and so that's where you might want to consider discussing it with a different professional group, where you might want to have a discussion with social services, and duty social services will talk you through things that are of concern. They will do that, and they won't tell you always that you have to put that in as a report. They will provide you with, and so will the NSPCC. Sorry, I've just flicked my computer off. I don't want to crash it. But I do think that especially if your colleague has a number of children, you have a number of children, as long as you don't go and say to a colleague, right, this child is presented with this thing, that absolutely you could discuss confidentially some elements, and particularly that you could talk through to give yourself that sort of professional clinical supervision. But I think that the context of that, Laura, I think that's a really tricky one for you. The context of that is quite difficult because you don't really have that same level of safeguarding support. So for you, I think my best tip would be to actually consider sometimes if something was really worrying you, actually just have a conversation with the duty social work team, which will often help you. Would you refer?
I'm
Oh,
just going to jump in and say that that was a really good question, and I'm going to do
great
some
question.
research and make sure that when we send you the follow-up resources, that I try and get you a very helpful answer.
A better answer is what
No,
she's
no,
trying to
no,
say,
just
really. But
something
yeah,
that is out there from the Childminders
that would be
Association.
lovely. Or there might be something within the childminding organisation that actually is something that offers you that sort of supervision support, because
Yes.
all of us would say safeguarding is best when you can get supervision from other people. I am conscious, as always, that I'm running out of time. Would you refer an uncommon bruise if the parent wasn't sure where it come from? So again, I think probably some of these questions are a little bit too black and white in whether nothing is, that's the whole problem with safeguarding. Nothing is that simple. So the question is, would you refer an uncommon bruise if the parent wasn't sure where it come from? And again, most of that thing would come together. So if this is one single bruise in a child where I had no other concerns, in a child who has good interaction with their parents, in a parent who wasn't at all evasive, wasn't at all difficult. I'm presuming we're thinking that this is also a child that couldn't tell us. One single bruise, no, I probably wouldn't refer that, because no one is going to be able to say that definitely wasn't an injury. But if my picture was an uncommon bruise in a parent who was not didn't know but was actually quite evasive around those questioning, in a child where I already had other concerns, then I've got and that's the bit to always remember with safeguarding. You'll have been told this before, but safeguarding is very much about putting a jigsaw puzzle together, and we've got pieces of information and it helps us. Now, you might have one piece of information that finally, by you referring something, a child that you've got concerns about, actually that's that final piece because other people have already raised concerns. Or it might be that for you, you were already having some niggles about something, but you couldn't really put your finger on what was worrying you, and then that bruise is the final thing. But I would say an uncommon bruise as an isolated incident where a parent didn't know where it came from but wasn't at all difficult about that, was happy to chat but just said, oh, do you know what, I noticed that too and I can't think for the life of me where it comes from. Then you might note that, recognize that, but not necessarily act on it. See if I can still get the last couple done. Oh, that's a nice one. What if the child seems scared to give answers to injuries? Shall we keep asking more questions or to leave and just ask the parents? So I think actually what you definitely don't want to do is put a child into a situation where they feel uncomfortable, where they feel frightened, but you would definitely note that and again, think about that in how your children normally behave. A child who didn't want to tell you the story of an injury, when they come back to see you on Tuesday morning as their first day back and they've hurt themselves, think about the children who have hurt themselves over the weekend when you last weren't looking after them, and how much of a detailed explanation when you probably got down to what colour their shorts were when they fell off the slide and what colour the slide was and who was pushing it. So a child who seems scared would be a massive red flag to me. But I would agree with you about not pushing and pushing. I would then see and ask what the parents' explanation was, but I would start putting all of those things together. Again, is this an injury? So the child seems scared, and also it's in an unusual place, or also it's an unusual thing. The child won't tell you. Then what does the parent give you as an explanation? Does that match up? So none of these things, I'm afraid, which is why it's so hard, are in Lindsay, that's a really good one. So this question was, what about a child with special education needs that head bangs to self-regulate? Well, then, so that's something that you know happens. And I guess probably around that is what are the practices that are there to protect the child as much as you can. But that will also be an activity I would presume that you would be witness to and you would be aware of. We all know that children with special educational needs or children who are less verbal are more vulnerable. So that child is more at risk of other injuries. But actually, it's about, again, where are these injuries? So if a child headbangs, we probably have some idea about the area that they do that. But again, that's quite a difficult one. And head related injuries are going to be the sort of thing you expect. So it's a bit hard to look. You're probably looking for that child in something else. I'm not sure if that really does answer it, but hopefully it does. Lovely, wonderful. I've got two more. Let's see. Oh no, I've got a couple more. Can we ask for proof that they have sought medical help? That's a really interesting one. I don't think, again, Tina, maybe you can look into whether you are allowed to ask for proof. One of the things I'm going to say is probably not, because they wouldn't necessarily get proof. So I wouldn't automatically give people, if someone needs it, I can ask. Schools nowadays do ask for it quite a lot. It generates an awful lot of work for the health service. So that does make it quite difficult. So yeah, that is quite a hard one. I think that
I'll have a look into that too, because obviously you might, I think that there is some guidance about having a child in your setting if there's a concern about their health or well-being, and if you might need to know whether they've sought help, because otherwise you might want to say, well, I can't have your child here unless they've had help, because I'm concerned that they're not well enough.
yeah.
So I'll come back again in the follow-up about that.
Yeah, but the proof is quite probably a difficult thing for them to necessarily prove. But yes, absolutely. What they would have, though, is a guidance sheet or something that would help you to identify. Right, we are running out of time and we're over time. So if you need to drop off the call, please do. Or if you've passed out and fainted or too hot, absolutely disappear. But I'll try and get through those last couple. So this one particularly, if a child said the dad hit them, they had no injury, would you refer? Now, what I'm going to say with this one is, again, there's context. Smacking in the UK is still not an illegal practice unless it leaves a harm or causes mental harm.
Actually, I think only England. You're not. It's
Did I
against.
say UK or did I say England?
Yeah, England.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. In England. Yeah, sorry. And I'm answering at the moment from England. So, but actually, again, this whole thing goes together in a picture. So what is the context of that? What is the parent's explanation? I do think that you can say, I need to share with you that actually X told us that that they were hit today, and then it's about, is there explanation within that that concerns you? Hit is such an interesting word, isn't it? So I probably would ask the child for a little bit, see if you can get a little bit more of a story from them. But the one message that I do want you to take is that we should be listening to and believing children. But again, it's about some of that information and some of that context. So that is a little bit of a hard one, because it isn't necessarily illegal. So again, where did they hit them? Is the child telling you that their dad hit them, and use the word hit them across the face? They've got no injury. Did the dad hit them with something, which is getting into the realms of where it's not appropriate? Is this a child who was smacked across the back of the legs by their parent now because they had hurt their sibling? You may have a different view on parenting, but that's not necessarily considered abusive. So it's just that bit. Oh, okay. Tina, if you read that last one and see if you are happy for that, I am happy for that. But there was one specific one-to-one question.
Yeah,
I think we're at the bottom of the list. So if you are that person on that's left the very last message, you will know who you are. By all means, hang on for a minute. Otherwise, thank you again for your attendance. That was amazing. There was loads and loads of you. I am sorry that the questions are a bit more ambiguous when it's this sort of subject, because it's just so hard. And I'm with you on it. It's exactly the same dilemmas as I would have on a daily basis on do I want to be concerned? Do I want to do a referral? Is this bothering me? Can I share this information? So there are definitely things within that, though, that hopefully and really, really good questions. We will follow that up with a more formal reporting process, which probably won't be from me because that's not my area of expertise. But thank you all for your time. Thank you for you this evening. We will let you all now drop off the call.
I just want to say thank you too from me. Can you hear me, Amy?
Yes, yes.
And just say that we run these fairly regularly. I haven't checked. There's another one coming up. It's on the website, and they're always free to attend. And we really hope that you find them useful. And if there are any suggestions for subjects that you would particularly like us to cover, just when I email you with the resources, just let me know. because obviously we want to be meeting any needs that you have for information. And thank Amy, thank you so much. Your experience is invaluable, and I can't believe you've done that many decades in the NHS.